As a trauma survivor, I have always been interested in resilience. But growing up, I believed it was something that you were born with. Then in graduate school, I learned that it was a quality that we all possess and a set of skills we can all strengthen. Most of my resilience has come from writing and seeing myself in new ways by confronting the stories I've always told myself. The more I did that, the stronger I became, and I've dedicated my life to helping others do this work. This podcast is for anyone who wants to understand their story and how to revise it, because when we do that work, we change the world. When you hear the phrase hungry author, what does that mean to you? How might a hungry author approach their goals, and what might they be willing to do to achieve them? Join Sourcebook's nonfiction editor Ariel Curry and ghostwriter Liz Morrow as we talk about the mindset writers need to succeed, how to stay hungry while working on your writing projects, and the surprising new role that self-publishing is playing in the publishing industry on this week's episode of the Writing Your Resilience podcast. Let's dive in. Well, hello, Liz and Ariel. I am so excited to see you today. It's been a while, and I am so happy that we get to talk about your beautiful book, Hungry Authors. Congratulations on your book launch, which happened in August. So just to begin, tell us what you'd like us to know about your book.
Thank you so much for having us. Hungry Authors is the indispensable guide to planning, writing, and publishing a nonfiction book. And we did not come up with that subtitle, but I think it does capture it pretty well of what we're trying to do here. We truly believe that if you want to write a nonfiction book, you can. You absolutely can. If you have the right plan and the gumption to do it, it is possible to do it and to get it out in the world in a way that is aligned with your vision and going to reach readers really effectively. And so we wanted to capture our process, the process that we've used for a long time as professionals in the publishing industry. And so we put that into as simple and easy a process as we could come up with. And we put it into this book to hopefully guide other people to, making their dreams come true and really seeing their vision come to life in the form of a book.
Yeah, I love that, Ariel. I think that's such a great description. And it really does feel holistic. And I think even before that, to the mindset that you need to have in order to write a book and publish a book, which I love that. And then there are so many practical tips and practical pieces in here that it makes it very accessible. It gives you a sense of the vision. And so, Liz, I'm going to ask you though, why hungry authors, right? It's a lovely title. I love it. Why hungry authors? And what does it mean to be a hungry author? And feel free to also jump in, Ariel.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. We love this question. So, hungry authors, the terminology existed before the book or the business or the podcast or the cohort or anything. So, it started as just an idea or a way that Ariel and I talked about our ideal clients or the people that we saw succeed, separately, as when she and I came together as friends and colleagues, 3+ years ago. And we would talk about our strategy and our process of writing and our general worldview on publishing and what it takes and the people that succeeded. We would talk about these kinds of writers. Obviously, it's great if you are good at your craft and you have a good idea and you have a platform. All those things are great. But the thing that matters the most is actually this mindset, this way of operating where you are determined to succeed no matter what. I know it sounds oversimplified and cliched, but Ariel and I both just could identify our successful clients. They were not usually the ones who had the biggest platform or had the best idea at the beginning or, were the best writers. They were the ones who took direction, took feedback, pivoted when they needed to, because they were going to succeed no matter what, whether it was me, whether it was Ariel, whether it was some other publishing professional or collaborator who came alongside them, or all on their own. They were going to make it happen. There's this quality of a person who is just such a crusader that they're going to make it happen no matter what. And Ariel and I were talking about this kind of person one day, and she's like, yeah, at Corwin, where she used to work, she and her old boss used to say they're hungry for it. They're the hungry authors. So that's the origin story of of that terminology. So we started calling them that, calling the book that, calling the business that. When we say determined or hungry for it, we don't mean pig-headed in this driven way that they're just going to bust through every wall and do it their way or the highway. We have a great definition for this that we probably should have memorized, but it's at the front of our book and it's on our website and stuff. But that they do what it takes. And often that means listening to professionals. That means, again, taking feedback, taking the time to build the platform if that's what it requires, taking the time to improve something if that's what it requires. They are flexible, but they are determined. And they're going to find the resources that they need to find. And it's going to happen no matter what, whether you're part of that team or not. And those are the kinds of writers that people want to get behind,
Yes.
Yeah. One of the core pieces, actually the very first foundational piece of the hungry author's mindset that we talked about in chapter 1, Liz came up with this, is that, the hungry author is someone who says, I'm going there. You can come with me. So, to a publisher, if your goal is to be traditionally published, there is something really attractive to an editor. And I am, back and in-house at a publishing company. And there is something definitely appealing to when authors come to me and they're like, I'm doing this really cool thing. I'm doing this book. It's going to be successful. Here are all the things that I'm doing to make it successful.
Yes.
Do you want to come along and partner with me? And I'm like, oh, okay, that's a compelling offer right there. I'm interested. And you can do that regardless of how you decide to publish. But it's that idea of, I am going there. Y'all want to come or not?
Yeah. And what I noticed is that in that same chapter that you're referring to, that was the mindset that the two of you came up with when you were thinking about this book. You were like, this is an idea. We think authors need it. We are willing to do what it takes. And so, you know what? We are going to pitch this to traditional publishers. However, if they say no, we're going to think about hybrid. We're going to think about self-publishing. The book's coming out, right? That's the foregone conclusion. It's just a matter of the vehicle that we're going to take to get it out there. And this happens to be traditionally published, but it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. I don't actually think Ariel and I have ever put it exactly quite that way, but I love the implication, that the book will exist. That's just, like you said, a foregone conclusion. That will happen. I will write it. I will market it. I will sell it. It will become a part of everything that I do. How that happens, there are lots of different ways that I will explore, but that piece is not up for debate. That will happen. That certainly was how we started. But actually, we set out to hybrid publish because we wanted it out quickly. We envisioned it being a little bit smaller than it was. And, and we didn't have a big platform. We didn't have a business. We didn't have a podcast. We were pretty behind the scenes kind of people. And then, one day Ariel was like, we literally write book proposals for a living. Like, why are we not shooting our shot? And so we're like, okay. And then, traditional publishing worked out for us, but that certainly would not have stopped us. We were going to do it no matter what. And it would have happened a lot faster and it would have been a totally different experience, but it would have happened,
Yeah. And I think that was one of the things that I found to be most motivating about your book is just thinking about that mindset, which I think is really important for all of us to consider, why are you hungry? What are you hungry for? What are you willing to do? Because as you both know, as Liz, you work as a ghostwriter. You're doing a lot of work behind the scenes with editing. Ariel, you're now with Sourcebooks and you're an acquisitions editor. So you're both in the industry and you know that the industry is changing a lot. And I was in a webinar recently where they were talking about how the average number of books a reader is reading nowadays is 3, which blew my mind.
At a time, or what's the
3 per year? 3 per year.
Per year?
3 per year.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So you may have different thoughts on that. Is a number that I heard, but between that and the concepts of, oh no, we're not looking for memoirs. We're looking for memoir plus, and we're not taking as many. And Kate McKean yesterday, and you guys may not have seen this, but she had a piece out yesterday in her Substack that was about how you don't have to monetize your traumas. And I will link that in the show notes so people can read that. But yeah, so there's all of these things that can become obstacles. What are you telling the authors that you work with now to help continue that hunger or to re-engage them if they're feeling, a little down about the process.
Yeah. I mean, it is really hard. And I have this conversation with authors all the time because in some ways, the publishing industry is overloaded with authors who want to publish. So that's the hard part for, acquisitions editors. I have so many proposals in my inbox right now, and I can't pursue all of them, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm publishing 12 to 15 books a year. That's it. And I receive hundreds of proposals, and every single editor, multiply that by every single editor is receiving hundreds of proposals, but they're only putting out a dozen-ish books. So there's just that, supply and demand. There's so much supply right now for proposals. That makes it hard. And like you said, there is more competition for readers' attention. So, oh gosh, I hope it's not 3. I hope it's more than 3.
You and
But
me
I don't
both.
know. Who knows what it actually is. But it is true that readers' attention is also being demanded by Netflix, and it's also being demanded by TikTok, and it's also being demanded by, family obligations and life and work and all these other things that readers have going on. So there is tons of competition, and it is really, really hard for publishers because publishers are operating at just like a bigger scale than self-publishers. So publishing, traditional publishers have to take risks and make bets on the things they feel very, very confident they can sell a lot of copies of. So if they don't feel that like very, very confident on that, then they're going to have to say no, no matter how much an editor personally loves that title. And that's
I'm
the
going
hard
to
of an
interrupt
editor.
you for just a second on that because you brought up my ear was like, do. Everyone's going to want to know the answer to this.
Okay.
You said a lot of copies. Can you give me some numbers? Because I think that's really important for people to hear.
Yeah. I mean, on the very low end, I would say a publisher wants to sell, and this is also going to be very different by the publisher. Independent publishers are going to have a tolerance for smaller print runs and smaller sales. Bigger publishers are going to need to support much bigger numbers.
Yes.
So like a bigger publisher might say, if we can't sell less than 100,000 copies, we're not even considering it. Other publishers might say, if we can't sell less than 5,000 copies, we're not considering it.
Yes.
And different publishers are going to kind of exist in somewhere in a range, right? But I would say probably the average book is going to be selling like maybe 2,000 copies or less, which is not a lot. And probably most publishers want to be able to like pretty safely estimate like 10,000 at least, hopefully. So that does give you a sense of like, okay, can I like really count on like that many people are going to want my book? And do I actually have the capacity to reach that many people, right?
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. So to answer your previous question, there is lots of opportunity to self-publish, and it is like the best time to self-publish because authors have so many options and they can do so many amazing, cool things. Like I have seen some gorgeous self-published books, absolutely beautiful. If you're on Book Talk, holy cow, there are people self-publishing some really beautiful books out there. So like the quality thing is not really an issue anymore with self-publishing because you can do amazing self-published books. And what's becoming more and more common is that self-publishing has become kind of a playground to test the efficacy of a book and then see if it gets picked up by a traditional publisher. So like as an acquisitions editor, I am looking on TikTok and Book Talk all the time. I am watching the Amazon bestseller rankings to see what self-published books are taking off that I might want to pick up. Because that's a totally valid way to get books now.
And nothing proves a hungry author's mindset better than someone who literally just went and did it themselves,
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And Ingrid Clayton, who was on the podcast, she self-published her memoir, and I don't know how many copies it sold at this point, but it had sold at the time that we met, it was over 11,000 copies, which is huge, for self-published. And now she has a book that she just recently announced on Fawning, which I'm very excited about, which they've sold international rights for. And I don't know exactly when that's going to come out, but the reason that the publisher was interested in her was because of the success that she had had with her memoir. And so what's interesting, what you're saying, Ariel, is that the way you're talking about this is very different than it was, I would say, 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I think I was actually in a session in 2016 at the Creative Nonfiction Conference, and agents and acquisition editors were saying, if you self-publish, you have essentially excluded that book from anything we're
Yes.
going to be looking at. And you're saying something different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
a
I mean,
big
honestly, yeah, like this, I have permission to tell this story, but I'm primarily a collaborator, ghostwriter, collaborative writer. And the biggest, one of my most beloved clients and biggest contract of my career came from a couple. They're amazing, the Castons. They run Marriage 365. They have an app. They had a self-published book called 365 Connecting Questions. And that self-published book has sold over 100,000 copies on its own.
Nice.
And they got picked up by the agent who represents me, Lucinda Halpern. She represented them. And then that book and two others. So it's a 3-book deal with an imprint of Penguin Random House. And I'm signed on to write those books with them. And so, yeah, that self-published book, I mean, obviously it sold really well. So that was incredibly important and helpful.
Yeah.
But it was that self-published book. They weren't looking for a book deal, by the way. They were just living their lives, running their business, selling their little book on Amazon. And all of a sudden, Lucinda Halpern comes knocking at their door and she's like, do you know what you're sitting on right now? Like you could get a mega deal. And they did. And so, yeah, it is not some sort of dark mark or a sign that you're worse in some way. Like a lot of people are even choosing that, even if they have the traditional route as an option, they're still choosing. Because I remember even a conversation I had with the Castons where they're like, tell me, like, this book is selling well. I'm getting all the royalties of it. So tell me why I would want to sell it to you, Penguin.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There are lots of reasons for that we don't have to get into now. But yeah, I mean, like, I think people just don't have a long enough view sometimes of their career. Like, don't think about, this book or nothing, or this book in traditional publishing or nothing. Like, have that mindset, like you said, Lisa, where like, this book will exist some way or another, and so will multiple others probably. That, and a lot of people's careers now involve some mix. Like we know plenty of people who've they traditional published their first couple books, and then they had an idea and nobody wanted it, despite the fact they had a great selling track record.
Yes.
And so they just self-published that one, or they hybrid published it, or they wanted to pivot genres, and all of a sudden there wasn't as much of a market for that, but they still wanted to write it. So they just did it. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a long game in a positive way. I don't mean long game like it's going to take you forever. I mean, you have so many options, so many things could happen. You take the next right step that you can, you hold your goals loosely and understand that there are a lot of different ways to get there. And self and hybrid publishing are great options, and they might lead to other things, Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, what I'm hearing you say is that what's important is not to think about necessarily the book, but to think about your career and how is this a stepping stone in your career as an author? How are you going to see this? And I have a couple of follow-up questions. We're going in a very different direction, which I love. I love it when we have this little, synchronicity and different energy. It's great. This is a very short question for you, Liz, and then just a question for both of you. So the Castons got this deal, and it's a multi-book deal. And I'm asking for a specific reason because authors have these thoughts. Is that deal for more nonfiction books or books within the genre that their original book was, or is it other genres? And you can say as little or as much as you want, because I recognize that you are limited in what you might be able to say, but I'm just going to give you the context so you understand how you might want to answer this. Is that I know a lot of people, especially in the memoir space, because I work a lot in memoir, and they're like, I'm going to write this memoir, and then I'm going to go write these novels. I'm going to write these other kinds of books. And that's the reason I'm asking that question, because I think that the answer is relevant to the people who might be listening?
Yeah. The 3-book deal, the first is a revamped version of the self-published book, which is almost always what happens. They have a really successful self-published book and a traditional publisher wants to pick it up. And then sometimes, even often, but sometimes that's coupled with some other, and we want you to write, another one or two, or because of the track record of the first. And so
yes,
those subsequent books are they are in the same genre, same vein, same topic, relationships, marriage, very much. And by the way, the Castons have a very successsul business, and all of this is a part of a larger ecosystem for them.
Yes.
To feed their business, find clients, get speaking opportunities, part of a larger message that they share all around the same topic. So yes. And for fiction, it happens similarly in that they'll like pick up the self-published novel and want them to write another one. I don't know, we don't know as much about fiction because we don't specialize in that genre, but often like if you self-publish a contemporary romance book, they'll probably want you to write another contemporary romance book. I can say pretty confidently, Ariel can say even more confidently, but I can say pretty confidently that like if you write a successful self-help book and self-publish it, you will not couple that with a novel deal in one contract. That doesn't really happen. So that cross-pollination of genres in one deal doesn't really happen. But like, just because you are a successful nonfiction writer does not mean that you can't go write fiction books if you want to. Plenty of people do that, but that's a different track of your career, kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Ariel, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. What I have seen typically happen is that more often a fiction author has success as a fiction author and then decides they want to write a memoir or something else.
Yeah.
And I see it, to just be totally honest, I see it more often working from fiction to nonfiction rather than from nonfiction to fiction. To be totally honest, I can't think of any examples of someone who started in nonfiction and then wrote fiction successfully.
Well, like Elizabeth Gilbert, maybe she started in like memoir and as a journalist, but she already had, I mean, she's like mega famous.
Yeah. I can think of two examples, but which I'll share, but I think your point is very valid.
Yeah. Still true. Yeah. That's a more common path.
Yes. Yeah. And the two examples I have are people that it's not necessarily going to be translatable to everyone, right? So these are probably the exceptions to the rule. One would be Courtney Mom, Lee Stein would be another person. And I think in fact, I recently read on her Substack, she published her memoir a while ago, and now she's having a big track record and doing well with her novels. And then I think the third person is Jeanette Walls. But these are people with huge platforms that, again, it's like when we think about, not even just being in the NBA, because I almost feel like if you get a book published, you're in the NBA, right? But you might be in the minor leagues of the NBA. I don't know, but like the very top stars that you might get the jersey for. It's a very few number of people. And I would consider all the names I just mentioned to be in that group.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think it is hard to change genres. It's even hard to change topics, right? Like Ryan Holiday is an example. He always talks about how he wrote these 2 marketing books that were moderately successful. And he wanted to write a book on stoicism, and his publisher was like, "Oh, well, do you have to?" And he was like, "Yeah, I have to." And they're like, "All right, we'll just like get it out of your system. We'll give you a deal, a really small advance for this, stoicism book. You can just like go do it, whatever, we'll publish it, fine." And they really wanted him to just keep writing marketing books, because again, publishers, the mindset is like, well, we did this one thing that worked. We are very conservative. So we want to keep repeating that success.
Yes.
Obviously, that's not always going to work. And you never know when an idea, that is really different and innovative can work. It's just that there's more risk when you do that. So to find a publisher that's willing to take that risk is where it's really hard. So if you are wanting to change genres, you might consider self-publishing in that new genre first. as a
Yeah.
way to prove to yourself that you can make it successful. And then you can take
Mhm.
that data to a publisher and say, look, I did it.
Yes.
I can do it. And this is why you should take the risk to publish
Mhm.
my other genre book.
Yeah, that I love this conversation and I love all of the juicy tidbits that you guys are getting in that relate to your book because you have this great section on self-publishing, on hybrid publishing, and also traditional publishing. And I love your checklist. Like, here are some things to consider. These are the pros, these are the cons. And so people should pick up your book so that they can explore these things because you're here in front of me and I can ask these questions and we can talk about them. And I'll begin with you, Liz. Is just, I know a lot of people that feel number one, oh my gosh, self-publishing is, second rate or it's settling, which obviously our conversation is saying it's not. But then I know a lot of people who get, I'm not even sure hunger is the right word. I think antsy.
Mhm.
And I don't think they're not ready yet, right? So when you think about self-publishing in particular, where you get to pull the trigger whenever you're ready, what does it mean to do it right?
Yeah, good question. So you will have to hire help. You can technically do it all on your own. That is possible in today's age, but to do it, like you said, well and right, you will have to get some help. You
Yeah.
will need to hire, at the very least, a proofreader or someone, an editor to come in behind you and proofread your work. Ariel and I would both advocate for having somebody earlier in the process than that, and a higher level editor, someone like a
Yes.
developmental editor or a substantive editor who helps you more with content and structure, and you can find lots of good people out there who can do that for you. So there is like a cost associated with it. It's,
Yes.
there's a huge range, but you will need to hire help. And then there are lots of different methods for self-publishing, of course, like Amazon's, you've got its platform. And I honestly don't know a ton about the different like softwares and companies out there these days. We know hybrids. There are lots of hybrids that do it. There's a more significant cost associated with that.
Yeah.
There are different, we get into that in our book, the benefits of hybrids, but they will often have an in-house editor who will work with you at least on that last pass of line editing or just proofing. They have distribution channels, some of them, to traditional retailers. So if you use a hybrid, there's a chance your book could end up in certain stores still.
Mm-hmm.
And they have, depending on what package or what your contract entails, there's different things. But basically, the fact remains the same that you can just go to them and publish it. There's no
Yes.
gatekeeper. You can pay to have that done. Again, it's more expensive than doing it on your own. But yeah, I mean, in general, everyone's economic situations are different, but in general,
Mm-hmm.
you can self-publish well in a fairly affordable way, but you will still have to have a couple people come alongside you to
Yes.
help you out with that. We would almost never advocate for you to just write something and put it out there, no matter how much time you've spent working on it. I won't engage. I almost exclusively work with people with traditional book deals these days.
Mm-hmm.
But even when I have somebody that comes to me and they want a hybrid or self-publish it, and I decide to work with that person, I will not sign on to a project unless there is an editor attached, because I would never put out anything with my name on it in any capacity,
Yes.
even if I'm ghosting it, that has not been proofed and, been read through by an editor who really knows what they're doing. So that, I mean, most important thing is just hire somebody, go find somebody to help you do that. Yeah. What else, Ariel? I mean, I don't know. We don't do a whole lot of self-publishing, but that's the main thing I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I'll reframe that question for you, Ariel, if that's okay. And I'm going to just share this one tidbit because I've heard, I think too many people do this, and I'm probably going to get hate mail for it. And that is okay. Don't go to your friend who is a high school English teacher and rely on them to be your editor. And it's not that they are not intelligent, capable people who know lots of things. It's just more goes into it in terms of understanding how stories work, understanding what the metrics are. I mean, so many things go into it.
Yes, I could not agree more. Anytime someone tells me, "Oh, my, sister's friend read it and she's really good at English or she self-published a book," I'm like, Oh, okay. I mean, the qualifications are different there. Uh,
Yes.
I think, like you said, you have to really work with someone who understands story structure if what you're writing is
Mhm.
memoir or fiction, but someone who just in general has a deep knowledge of book structure and
Yes.
how to craft a cohesive transformation,
Mhm.
because a book is a product. So almost think of it like if you were creating a website, like sure, your sister's friend might have created her blog on WordPress or something and may be able to do like an okay job, sure, with that. But if your goal is to have a really professional looking website, you're going to go to a website development company that does this
Yes.
and that knows how these things work, who really has a deep understanding of security and,
Mhm.
can check all of the boxes that you need to present something that is really compelling and beautiful and takes into account the user's experience. And that's really the key
Yes.
there, I think, is that a really, highly qualified, experienced editor is going to be thinking and reading your book through the lens of the reader and the reader's
Mhm.
experience. And how is the reader engaging with this story? How are they engaging
Yes.
with your content? What is the reader's growth development,
Mhm.
trajectory throughout this book? If you're writing prescriptive nonfiction, then you are explicitly guiding the reader along on a transformative journey
Yes.
to some destination that you've stated at the beginning of the book.
Mhm.
If you're writing fiction or memoir, then you are more implicitly guiding the reader on a journey
Yes.
to some kind of transformational state through the example of your story. And so you have to work with someone who understands how to do that because
Yes.
it is a complex process and it is not
Mhm.
easily done. And you also want someone who's familiar with the publishing industry and who understands, the marketability aspects of all of this because often as authors, we're living in creative land, which is a
Mhm.
fantastic, wonderful place to live. It's a lot of fun there. But you also have to balance that by thinking about the marketability. Because if you want your book to be
Yes.
read and enjoyed by anyone, you have to be thinking about it from their perspective. And an
Mhm.
editor or a, highly experienced book coach is going to be the person to help you get there.
Absolutely. I think that is so important. You want to make sure that you're working with someone who is really qualified and understands, and I would say has a track record, has worked with other people who have been successful, because that demonstrates their capacity for success and their understanding of what's happening. And, I would also say, think about your book like a mini business, right? So this is like your business you're carrying around. And if you think about it in that way, versus this is my fun thing that I did with my friends, in my critique group. It's a different mindset. And Jane Friedman has so many great things to talk about in terms of ROI, right? Return on investment, which is I'm something I'm sure that, at your publishing house, you're looking at what is the return on investment, and platform is a piece of that, but not necessarily in the ways that people always think. And that's something, when I look at your book, there's so many great things in it, but that is the thing that I have seen fluttering around, in the blogosphere. So could we take a minute to talk about author platform, because there's so many misconceptions, and I'd love to hear about your author platform that you use for hungry authors, because I'm gonna be honest with you. I was doing my little digging before we met today, and I'm like, I see you in very few places, but you have a book deal, and I know that you're successful. So let's dive into that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And we recognize that ourselves, which is part of why we anticipated we're probably going to self-publish this or hybrid publish this. And to be totally honest, as an acquisitions editor, like I probably wouldn't have signed myself to a book deal, just to be completely honest. So I knew that going into it. I think what we had going for us is that we have a really strong network. So one of the things
Mhm.
that I think our perspective on platform that we say in the book and elsewhere throughout our podcasts and our classes that we teach and everything is you have to think about platform more broadly than just social media
Yes.
or online presence. Speaking engagements are huge. So Liz and I also have a long track record of teaching classes and
Mhm.
we've spoken at conferences before and we speak to writing groups often.
Yes.
So we are not everywhere all over the internet. And part of that is because like we have lives and we have limited energy and it takes a
Mm-hmm.
lot of energy to put yourself out there online, but we put ourselves out there in other ways. We do podcasts and we cultivate relationships. And
Yes.
so your platform can be so much more than just your online presence and especially so much more than just your social media presence. I know I have actually seen a very prominent book coach, in fact, who said like basically, I will not work with you unless you have at least 100,000 followers. And that made me so angry because I was like,
Yeah.
oh, like I hate that because you are perpetuating the myth that you have to have gajillions of followers to get a book deal. And
Right.
Liz and I both have seen that you don't. You do not. In fact, you can
Mm-hmm.
look at the New York Times bestseller list. This is one of my favorite exercises to do. I do it every so often. And I'm like, I just want to look at like how many followers does this person have? And guess what? Often on the New York Times bestseller list, there is someone who has
Mm-hmm.
a couple bylines in a couple places, and that's all they have. And what matters is they wrote an incredible book. They had an incredible idea
Yeah.
and they knew how to work their network or leverage whatever
Mm-hmm.
audience they did have to get that message out there. And so we see that happen again and again, and that's part of
Yes.
the message of hungry authors. But yeah, platform depends on so many things. It's
Mm-hmm.
bigger than social media. It also depends on the publisher, right? Because again,
Yes.
different publishers are going to have different platform expectations. So to work with one of the big five, yeah, some editors at the big five houses might require bigger platforms,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're writing prescriptive nonfiction or something.
Yes.
But an independent publisher might have a tolerance for a much smaller platform and might say, you know what, we love publishing new voices and that's our thing. And we want
Mm-hmm.
to invest in authors and give them a chance to get their name out there. And there are those publishers that do that. And so it is kind of more of a matter of just like finding the right editor and the right publisher who's willing to take that risk,
Yes.
no matter what size your platform is. It also depends on the genre. Like I just said,
Yes.
you know, prescriptive nonfiction, the expectations from readers for platform are usually higher because if you're saying, I'm an expert on whatever topic,
Mm-hmm.
then readers are going to expect that you've got some credibility built in there somehow.
Yes.
And that's all part of your platform. If, however, you're writing fiction or memoir, like your expertise is not a qualifying factor to writing a really great story. And so you can have like little to no platform and still write a fantastic narrative driven book. So there's so many different factors and platform is it's way more multifaceted and complex. And so part of
Yes.
I feel like the mission of Hungry Authors is helping kind of break down platform in all of these different
Mm-hmm.
ways so that authors can leverage their strengths better. Because we'll say,
Yes.
okay, social media is not a strength for you, just like it's not a strength for us. But maybe your network is amazing, or maybe you know how to get articles into the New York Times, or you know how to get speaking engagements.
Mm-hmm.
Leverage that, do that instead.
Yes. I think that that makes so much sense. And that's one of the things that I tend to think about, or when I'm working with someone on a book proposal and we get to that point and I see them biting their nails and going like, oh my gosh, what is this? I've been surprised by the number of people who have little to no social media presence. And then I start asking, what listservs are you a part of? What groups are you a part of? How are you involved with people out in the world in a way that maybe no one else knows? And, I have an author I'm working with right now that's part of this massive listserv that they're very active on. No one would know it out in the world, but they have these professional connections. And if you were to think about one thing or one way for people to think about platform that doesn't involve social media, because I agree, you have some great examples of like Billie Eilish and Justin Timberlake, millions of fans online, very poor book sales in comparison to what was expected. What's that one thing you would want someone to think about or do?
I would want them to think about how do I enjoy connecting with people and how can I use whatever tool that is or whatever platform that is or whatever, medium that is and make it bigger. So if
Yeah.
you're like one of my favorite ways to connect with people is through my newsletter. So
Hmm.
guess what? Like I keep social media alive And
Mhm.
that's basically all I can say for it is like, it's there, it's alive. I post on it sometimes, but I pour so much energy into my newsletter. And that's where I love to connect with people. And that's where I want to see the most growth. And so I work really hard on growing that and developing a community of readers there that way. I also love speaking to people. And so again, Liz and I are pitching ourselves to writing groups and we're pitching ourselves to podcasts and we're pitching ourselves to conferences because we love talking to people about these things. And we just know that those are our strengths. Those are the things we enjoy most and that feel the most life giving for us and where we see the most engagement back. Like,
Yes.
to be totally honest, when I post something on social media, like getting 100 likes, I don't normally get 100 likes. I think I get less than that, but getting 100 likes, like, wouldn't really change my day.
Mhm.
However, having a newsletter go out and getting 20 really exciting, engaged comments from my subscribers on my newsletter would like really mean a lot to me. And so knowing that about myself, knowing this is the place where I like to engage, it's where it means the most to me to engage with people. I would say find that thing and just invest in that.
I love that. That is such a great answer. And yeah, I think that's really important for us to think about. What do you love to do? Where can you show up authentically? I can't even say that word slow enough because yes, you could be on social media and maybe it is all about the likes and the followers and whatever. And personally for me, I am on social media and you can connect with me there, but I have to be careful about social media for my brain's sake. There's a lot of research out there about what it does in terms of the hits to the dopamine and how that impacts just even our love of life. I mean, it has so many different things we could talk about. But I did love reading your recent Substack on how birthing a book is not the same as birthing a baby. And it goes into all these deep places. It was so beautifully written. I'm going to make sure that it's part of the show notes so people can read it.
I appreciate that. That's a perfect example of like I do feel like I can engage authentically in my newsletter. And I wrote that piece like months ago and I've been sitting on it. And I find
Mm,
like I'm just going to put it out there and see what happens. And I got so much engagement and so many great comments and it's always so affirming to me like when I allow myself to be really authentic and to go to those deep places to something that is really meaningful to me, people respond and I think that is
yes.
also a really good lesson for us when we think about platform is people want to engage with us authentically and I
Yes.
think you should also view your book as one more way to engage authentically with your readers, your where whatever place you found that you want to engage with authentically, see your book as an extension of that.
Mhm. Yeah, and so make sure that your book isn't just beautiful, but that it has heart.
Yes, exactly.
We could talk forever about all these things because there's so much to talk about. And there are so many wonderful things that are in your book. But I always like to end with three lightning round questions. So I'm going to share them with you. What was the best piece of writing advice that you got, especially when you were working on your book?
Well, okay. The best piece of writing advice I've ever gotten truly changed my life and set me on the path to Hungry Authors with Liz, which is to view the book as a journey for the reader. That was something like that's not something I created. That is something that I was told by a mentor many years ago when I was a baby acquisitions editor. And it completely changed the way I view books and the way I was planning and the way I did development. It helped me kind of see things from that broader perspective. And now is something we teach other authors. So that was definitely the best advice I have ever gotten. I think the best advice we got in the writing process for hungry authors was hard advice for me and I'm just speaking for myself here, which was that I was saying too much. I was going into too much detail and I needed to cut it back.
Mm,
So I especially like on some chapters like the genre chapter. I love genre and I went down this like really deep rabbit hole of genre and I was like, if we're gonna, write the next story grid for nonfiction and we're gonna go into so much depth around every single genre that exists in nonfiction. And lovingly, Liz was like, we need to scale this back because most people do not want to write that kind of a book. So it was good advice to just remain really focused on the reader and to really think about the reader's needs and creating, again, that really comprehensive, cohesive journey in Hungry Authors. Like I was kind of taking Hungry Authors on a little bit of a detour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you nailed it because this
Oh, thank you.
definitely feels like a journey from just motivation to idea to what do I do with it and how do I organize it and then how do I get it out there in the world. So you definitely nailed that. And, life has been happening all around us. I mean, one of the things that you talk about in that beautiful Substack is about infertility. So we have our health journeys that we go on. There have been hurricanes that have recently happened.
Yep.
People have kids, all kinds of stuff is happening around us. And you've got a book out in the world, and you're in your launch year. How are you nurturing yourself and your resilience as you navigate all of these things?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's a good question because that's not necessarily a strength of mine. It's definitely a challenge. And I'm having to really embrace like the present moments and trying to be really
Hmm.
present in whatever I am. Like we're foster parents. So when our kids
Hmm.
are home, being really present with them because they need lots of attention. They are
Yeah.
going through a trauma in their lives. We have to be really present for them. And then when I'm, at work, just try to be really present at work and
Hmm.
focus on that. So I feel like right now in the midst of all the craziness of life, I've had to like level up my presence skill,
Hmm.
my skill of like focus and intentionality with being in this conversation. Don't try to multitask, really be intentional with wherever I am to really place myself there. And I find that that also helps me to not be stressed about,
Hmm.
whatever, like I'm not thinking about the next thing that's happening. I'm just
Yeah.
living the present moment. And so when it comes time to do my creative work too, kind of viewing it the same way of like,
Hmm.
I'm here, I'm reading right now. This is what I'm doing. I'm not thinking
Yeah.
about my emails. I'm not thinking about breakfast that needs to be made for kids. I'm just reading because this is my reading time. So I don't know that that's the best answer, but that's kind of the best I'm doing right now.
No, I think that's a beautiful answer. How do you keep the blinders on? I mean, I'm wondering if it's easier because you're not on social media so much, but how are you staying focused? Like having that great boundary of no, I am going to be in the present moment.
I put my phone on do not disturb a lot.
Hmm.
And I'll wake up early and I'll tell my husband like, "Hey, I'm reading now. So like don't talk to me about the schedule for later, please, because I'm reading for the next 30 minutes, or I'm
Hmm.
journaling for the next 30 minutes or whatever." So like I've gotten better about, telling other people like this is what I'm doing, this is where I'm at.
Hmm.
Wait until I'm in, when it's time to make dinner, I will make dinner and I'll do that thing.
Hmm.
When it's time to, be in that meeting, I will be in that meeting. And so that's how I'm kind of trying to kind of set those boundaries and blinders for myself.
Yeah. So giving yourself permission, telling other people this is my boundary, and then just reminding yourself of it as you go through these things. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, if people want to get a copy of Hungry Authors or they would like to connect with you, obviously, maybe not as much on social media, but in other ways, what are the best ways for them to connect with you and buy your book?
Yeah. Well, you can visit hungryauthors.com to buy the book and find it in all the different places where it's available for sale. And of course, we'd love it if you leave a review on one of those places. You can also connect with us by listening to our podcast. So we often share like little bits about our lives on our podcast and obviously, our tips, and we have great interviews with people too. And then for me personally, the best way to connect is my newsletter for sure, which is arielcurry.substack.com.
Nice. And all of that will be in the show notes so people can just click the links and find everything.
Yay.
Well,
Thank you so
well,
much, Lisa.
you are very welcome. Thank you so much for being on. And thank you on behalf of all the hungry authors out there and authors who need to be hungry for writing your book.
Thank you. We are such fans of your podcast and of you, and it's been awesome to have you on the Hungry Authors podcast. And now it's exciting to get to be on yours as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm going to put that actually that episode also on the show notes. You're going to have a long
Yes.
show note.
Love it. Love it. Lots of resources for people to dig into.
That's it for today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about Ariel or Liz, or most importantly, buy a copy of Hungry Authors, please see the show notes for this episode. If you're learning from or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's a free and easy way to support the podcast. You can also get the latest episodes delivered to your inbox by signing up for my Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of A Trauma Survivor's Guide to Writing the Tough Stuff. You can also follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, where you can leave a 5-star review. If you have questions for me, comments about the podcast, or questions or topics you'd like me to consider for the Writing Your Resilience podcast, please leave a comment on YouTube. I read them all, and I'd love to hear from you.